The year was 2012, and Dr. Michael Renner stood at the height of his medical career. At 42, he had already become one of the most trusted cardiovascular surgeons in the state. His hands were steady, his voice calm, and his dedication unshakable. Patients traveled from across the country to be treated by him, believing his precision in surgery bordered on miraculous. Yet, behind his composed demeanor, something in him had begun to change. It started subtly. Late nights at the hospital that stretched into early mornings. Long hours in his dimly lit office, poring over patient records, transfusion logs, and surgical supply reports. He told colleagues he was just catching up, but the lines beneath his eyes deepened, and his smile came less often. Nurses whispered that he looked haunted. He would stand outside the operating theater, lost in thought, as if debating with himself before entering. On a crisp autumn morning drive, Renner was scheduled to perform a triple bypass, a routine procedure for someone of his skill. But when the nurses prepared the patient and the anesthesiologist called for him, there was no answer. His locker was open, his scrubs untouched, and his name badge lay neatly on the table beside a cup of half-finished coffee. Calls went unanswered. Texts were left on read. Hours passed, and the surgery was postponed. By noon, the hospital staff began to panic. When police were called, they discovered his car parked near the cliffs just outside the city, a spot known for its sweeping ocean views but also, tragically, for its share of suicides. The keys were still in the ignition, and his cell phone sat on the passenger seat. The last call he had made was to the hospital's internal administration line at 5:42 a.m. There was no message, only silence on the recording. Search teams combed the surrounding woods and the rocky shorelines for days. Helicopters hovered over the waves while divers scoured the depths. Nothing. No body, no footprints leading toward the edge, no signs of struggle. It was as if he had stepped out of existence, swallowed by the morning mist. The news broke across the city like a shockwave. "Renowned heart surgeon mysteriously vanishes," read the headlines. Patients wept outside the hospital doors, holding photographs of the man who had saved their lives. His colleagues were devastated. One of them, Drive Harris, who had been Renner's closest friend, said quietly to reporters, "Michael wasn't the kind of man to give up on life." Something else happened here. But as the days turned into weeks, the official story began to shift. Anonymous tips hinted that Dr. Renner had been under investigation for medical malpractice, a claim the hospital denied but never fully addressed. A few suggested he had fled to escape the consequences of a failed operation. Others whispered darker theories, that he'd uncovered something within the hospital he wasn't supposed to see. In the absence of proof, the mystery grew. His home was left untouched, as if he might return any moment. His family, broken by grief, refused to believe he was dead. His wife, Claire, visited the cliffs every Sunday, standing in silence, staring out at the gray horizon. On the 5th week after his disappearance, a letter arrived at their home, unsigned, typed, and untraceable. It read only, "He found what they were hiding. Now he's part of it." Detectives analyzed it for fingerprints and origin, but nothing surfaced. It seemed to come from nowhere. The letter was dismissed as a cruel hoax, yet for those who knew Michael, it felt chillingly plausible. He had recently mentioned to his assistant that something didn't add up. In the transplant reports, organs listed as transferred to patients who didn't exist in hospital records. He was going to bring it to the board's attention. Then he vanished. By winter, the case went cold. His disappearance became one of those unsolved urban legends whispered in hospital corridors, a cautionary tale about ambition, secrecy, and the darkness hidden behind sterile white walls. The cliffs were silent again, but the memory of Dr. Renner lingered like an unfinished operation, leaving everyone to wonder what truly happened to the man who had dedicated his life to saving others. 5 years had passed since the disappearance of Dr. Michael Renner, and his name had become little more than a mystery buried beneath layers of dust and unanswered questions. The hospital had moved on, hiring new surgeons, updating departments, and quietly erasing traces of a man who had once been its pride. But one summer evening in 2017, the past came crashing back in the most horrifying way imaginable. It was supposed to be a routine emergency surgery. A man named Harold Vance, 58, had been brought into St. Mary's Medical Center after a brutal car accident on Highway 16. His abdomen was torn from the seatbelt's impact, and internal bleeding threatened his life. The surgical team, led by Dr. Emily Carter, rushed him into the operating room. The staff moved with mechanical precision, anesthesia administered, gloves snapped on, monitors beeping steadily. For Dr. Carter, it was just another night of fighting the clock. As the surgery progressed, something unusual caught her attention. While carefully removing shards of glass and repairing torn tissue, her forceps struck something hard, metallic. At first, she thought it might be a fragment from the car wreck. But the shape was too smooth, too deliberate. Frowning, she asked the nurse for suction and light. Slowly, she exposed the object lodged deep within layers of muscle, near the lower left quadrant of the abdomen. What she saw made her freeze. It wasn't a piece of metal debris at all. It was rectangular, coated in a thin film of biological tissue, its edges corroded by time. She reached for it carefully, pulling it free from the wound. The object was sticky, blood-stained, and covered in scarred tissue as if it had been inside the body for years. When she wiped it gently with gauze, a faded logo appeared beneath the grime: St. Mary's Medical Center. And just below it, embedded under cracked plastic, was a name she hadn't seen in half a decade. Dr. Michael Renner. For a moment, the room went dead silent. Even the sound of the heart monitor seemed to fade into nothing. The circulating nurse stepped closer, staring in disbelief. "Doctor, that can't be real," she whispered. But it was. The letters were faint yet undeniable. The badge, his old hospital ID, was lying in the palm of her hand, freshly pulled from the body of a living patient. Dr. Carter felt her breath catch in her throat. How could this even be possible? She muttered. The anesthesiologist looked equally stunned. "He's been missing for years," he said. "That ID should have been in police evidence, not inside a man's abdomen." They completed the surgery in silence, shaken and uneasy. Afterward, drive. Carter placed the badge in a sterile bag and documented the find. Hospital protocol demanded a report whenever foreign objects were discovered inside patients, but this was beyond anything anyone had experienced. When Harold Vance regained consciousness the next morning, detectives were already waiting by his bedside. He was pale, confused, and weak, unaware of the chaos surrounding him. When shown a photograph of the ID, he stared at it, frowning. "I've never seen that before," he said hoarsely. "Why would that be inside me?" The question echoed through the hospital halls. The police quickly reopened Drive. Renner's case, treating the discovery as potential evidence of foul play. The badge was sent to forensics. Analysts confirmed it was authentic, not a replica. The microchip inside, though damaged, still carried fragments of Renner's employee data. There were faint traces of old blood and surgical adhesive on the back, suggesting it hadn't fallen in accidentally but had been deliberately sealed inside flesh during a procedure. News of the bizarre finding spread like wildfire. Reporters flooded the hospital entrance, demanding answers. "How does a missing surgeon's ID end up inside a patient?" screamed one headline. Social media exploded with speculation, some claiming it was proof that Renner was still alive, others insisting it was a message from whoever made him disappear. Dr. Carter couldn't sleep that night. She sat alone in her office, staring at the sealed evidence bag on her desk before it was sent to the police. The badge looked ancient, discolored, yet eerily intact, as though it had waited years to be found. She replayed every moment of the surgery in her mind, wondering if she had missed any clues. The location where it was discovered didn't make sense. There were no scars or signs of previous abdominal surgery. Whoever had placed it there had done so with surgical precision, and with the kind of expertise only a doctor could possess. In the shadows of St. Mary's, old memories began to resurface. Whispers spread through the corridors. Some said it was a curse, that the hospital was finally paying for its secrets. Others believed it was a message from Renner himself, a silent scream for justice sent from beyond the grave. Whatever the truth was, one thing had become terrifyingly clear: the mystery of Dr. Michael Renner was far from over. His story had returned, and this time, it demanded to be heard. The discovery of Dr. Michael Renner's ID card inside a patient's body sent shockwaves through the city. Within 24 hours, the local police department reopened his missing person case, now officially treating it as a criminal investigation. The dusty files that had sat untouched for 5 long years were pulled from archives, spread across tables, and examined by fresh eyes. At the center of this renewed inquiry stood Detective Laura Keene, a meticulous investigator known for her relentless pursuit of the truth. She had studied Renner's case years earlier as a young officer, and now, as lead detective, she was determined to uncover what everyone else had missed. Her first stop was St. Mary's Medical Center. She arrived early in the morning, the corridors unusually quiet. The hospital administration reluctantly allowed her access to Renner's office, which had been sealed shortly after his disappearance. The room was thick with dust, the air heavy with the weight of forgotten years. Papers were still stacked neatly on the desk. A coffee cup sat on the shelf, hardened with residue. Everything looked frozen in time, as if he had walked out for a moment and never returned. Detective Keene ran her fingers across a stack of patient files. Several were marked with red tabs, heart transplant cases, all from the same year. But something stood out. A few patient names didn't match any hospital registration numbers. She checked the central database. No records, no insurance details, no next of kin. It was as if those patients had never existed. That discovery unsettled her. She met with Dr. Harris, Renner's former colleague and longtime friend. His face had aged since the disappearance, the lines around his eyes deeper, his voice quieter. Michael was brilliant, he said, staring at the floor. But near the end, he became paranoid. He said there were surgeries being logged under false identities. He thought someone in administration was involved in organ trafficking. Detective Keene leaned forward. Did he have any proof? Dr. Harris hesitated, then nodded slowly. He was collecting evidence. He told me he'd found a shipment list for donor organs that didn't match any legitimate recipients. The names were fake. He said he was going to report it to the medical board. But before he could, he disappeared. That night, Keene took the files back to her office. She cross-referenced the dates, matching them against international medical shipment records. To her astonishment, she found irregularities, organs recorded as exported for humanitarian use, to overseas clinics that had no traceable locations. And one of those shipments had been signed off by none other than Drive. Michael Renner himself, dated 2 days before he vanished. The next clue came from forensics. The analysis of the ID found inside Harold Vance's abdomen confirmed traces of surgical adhesive and aged biological residue, consistent with exposure inside a human body for at least 4 years. Whoever had placed it there had done so intentionally. There was no sign of accidental contamination. Detective Keene ordered a background check on Harold Vance. His medical records revealed he had undergone a mysterious, private, surgery overseas in late 2012, shortly after Renner's disappearance. The procedure was classified as an organ transplant, though no official surgeon's name was listed. The surgery had taken place in a small clinic in Eastern Europe, one that had since been shut down. When she showed Vance photographs of Renner, his expression turned pale. I remember that man," he whispered. "He was there. He was in the room before the anesthesia kicked in. I thought I was hallucinating, but he was talking to someone, arguing." Keene's pulse quickened. "Are you saying Drive Renner performed your surgery?" Vance shook his head weakly. "No." He looked terrified, like he didn't want to be there. "Then someone injected me, and I blacked out. When I woke up, the surgery was done, and he was gone." Those words chilled her to the core. If Renner had been present during that illegal transplant, he may have been coerced, forced into working for the same criminal network he was trying to expose. Later that week, Keene met with the forensic pathologist who examined the badge. He revealed one final detail: under the layers of dried blood, there was a faint trace of a surgical glove print pressed into the back plastic. It wasn't Renner's. That single piece of evidence changed everything. Someone else, likely another surgeon, had held the ID and embedded it within the patient's body. Whether as a warning, a confession, or a signature, no one could yet tell. By the time Keene drove home that night, rain pounded against her windshield, the wipers struggling to keep up. She couldn't stop thinking about the terrified look Harold described, or the files filled with ghost patients. She was certain now, Drive Renner hadn't vanished by choice. He had stumbled into something vast, something powerful, and someone had made sure his discovery disappeared with him. But they hadn't expected his ID to resurface. And now, after 5 years of silence, the truth was clawing its way back to the surface. The next breakthrough in the investigation came from an unexpected source, a retired nurse named Evelyn Moore. She had worked at St. Mary's Medical Center for over 30 years before retiring in 2014. When Detective Keene reached out, Evelyn initially refused to talk, saying she wanted to forget that place. But after the shocking discovery of Dr. Renner's ID made national news, something shifted inside her. One late evening, she called the detective and agreed to meet. Her voice trembled over the phone as she said, "It's time someone knew the truth." They met in a quiet diner on the outskirts of town. Evelyn looked frail, her gray hair pinned back, her hands shaking as she stirred her coffee. Her eyes, however, were sharp, haunted, but alert. She wasted no time with pleasantries. "I remember the night before he disappeared," she said softly. Michael was scared. I'd never seen him that way before. Detective Keene leaned forward. "Tell me exactly what you saw." Evelyn took a deep breath. "It was just after midnight. I was leaving the night shift when I saw Michael in the parking lot, talking to a man in a dark suit. The man wasn't from the hospital, I would have known him if he was. They were arguing. I couldn't hear much, but Michael kept saying, 'I won't be part of this,' and the man told him he was already too deep in." She paused, her eyes welling with tears. "The next morning, he was gone." Detective Keene's pulse quickened. "Did you tell anyone at the time?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "I tried. I told the head nurse, but she told me to keep quiet. 2 days later, I was transferred to a different department. After that, no one mentioned him again. It was like the hospital wanted to erase him." The detective's pen scratched across her notepad. "Did you recognize the man in the suit?" "No," Evelyn said, "but I'll never forget his voice. Calm, cold, like someone used to being obeyed. And there was something else, an emblem on his tie. It looked like a caduceus symbol, but gold. Not a hospital insignia. Private, maybe." Keene's mind raced. The caduceus, the symbol of medicine, could easily belong to a medical association or even a private biotech company. She knew she had to dig deeper. Evelyn then revealed something that made Keene's blood run cold. "Michael came to me a week before that night. He said there were transplant reports missing from the system, donor organs that had been marked as used, but no record of the recipients. He showed me a list of names. I still remember one of them. A patient X23. No first name, no last name. Just that code. Do you still have the list?" Keene asked quickly. The nurse shook her head sadly. "No. After he disappeared, hospital security came to my locker. They said it was for routine checks. I knew they were looking for that list. I destroyed what little I had left." For a long moment, the only sound in the diner was the clinking of spoons and the distant hum of a refrigerator. Evelyn finally spoke again, her voice breaking. "Detective, you don't understand. He wasn't running from guilt. He was running from something inside the hospital itself. He found out they were doing illegal transplants, organs from unidentified donors, sent overseas through private funding. Some of those organs came back, used for black market surgeries. I think he threatened to expose them, and they silenced him." Keene's mind filled with questions. Could the man in the suit have been part of that illegal network? Was the hospital administration involved, or merely complicit through silence? Before leaving, Evelyn reached into her purse and handed the detective an old photograph. It showed a group of doctors at a charity event, among them, Drive. Renner, smiling faintly. Standing beside him was a man in a black suit with the same golden emblem on his tie. "That's him," Evelyn whispered. "The one from the parking lot." The next day, Keene ran facial recognition on the man from the photo. The results came back quickly. His name was Dr. Charles Whitaker, a surgeon with international credentials and ties to a now-defunct medical foundation known for humanitarian transplant operations. A foundation that had abruptly shut down in 2013, the same year Renner vanished. The pattern was undeniable now. Renner had discovered the truth about an underground organ trafficking network disguised as a medical charity. He'd tried to stop it, and when he refused to cooperate, they made him disappear. As Keene drove away from the diner that night, Evelyn's final words echoed in her mind. He tried to do the right thing. But in a world like this, sometimes doing the right thing gets you killed. For the first time, Detective Keene realized this case wasn't just about a missing surgeon anymore. It was about something far bigger, a secret that had cost more than one life to keep buried. And someone, somewhere, still wanted it buried. The investigation had reached a breaking point. Detective Keene had enough evidence to expose the truth, but not enough to convict anyone. The photograph of Dr. Charles Whitaker opened new doors, and new dangers. Whitaker had vanished 2 years after Dr. Renner, his clinic overseas, shut down under suspicious circumstances. Rumors said it had been funded by wealthy investors who specialized in private medical tourism. But the term was just a mask. The clinic had been performing illegal organ transplants for high-paying clients, using organs that never appeared in legitimate medical records. When Interpol joined the investigation, they traced several patients, including Harold Vance, back to that same clinic. Each had undergone complex surgeries, each connected by missing paperwork, and each paid through shell corporations that led nowhere. What made everything worse was that one of the signatures on those forms still belonged to Dr. Michael Renner. It made no sense. If Renner was forced into the operation, how had his credentials continued to appear years after his disappearance? The answer came in the form of a chilling discovery. Someone had been using his medical ID and credentials to authorize illegal surgeries long after he was gone. His identity hadn't just been stolen, it had been repurposed. A tip from local authorities in Eastern Europe finally led Keene and her team to an abandoned property in the countryside, the remains of Whitaker's private medical facility. The building was surrounded by rusted fences, its walls covered in mildew and graffiti. Inside, the smell of decay lingered. Broken equipment lay scattered across the floor, surgical lamps, operating tables, and biohazard containers, all coated in dust. But deeper inside, down a locked corridor, the investigators found something horrifying. In the basement of the clinic were several unmarked graves. Each grave was shallow, the soil disturbed long ago. The forensic team worked carefully through the night, unearthing what appeared to be human remains wrapped in tattered surgical gowns. Some skeletons bore evidence of surgical incisions, ribs cut open, skulls sawed with precision. It was clear these weren't ordinary burials. These were discarded victims, failed experiments, or silenced witnesses. Among the remains was one skeleton still wearing a torn lab coat. A faded name tag hung loosely from its collar. Under layers of dirt and rust, the letters were barely visible. But when the light hit it just right, Detective Keene could read the name. Dr. Michael Renner. The team fell silent. For 5 years, his disappearance had been a mystery. Now, the truth was staring back from the cold ground. Forensic testing later confirmed the DNA match. The missing surgeon had been found at last, buried among the very victims of the network he had tried to expose. The bones showed signs of restraint, fractures in the wrists, indicating he had been tied or handcuffed before death. A small puncture in the rib cage suggested he might have been injected with something lethal. Detective Keene stood over the grave as rain poured down, her heart heavy with a mix of anger and grief. "He didn't run," she murmured. "They silenced him." The discovery set off a chain reaction. International warrants were issued for several executives and medical officials tied to Whitaker's foundation. The scandal exposed a multi-million-dollar organ trafficking ring that spanned continents, exploiting the poor and desperate for profit. News channels around the world reported it as the Renner conspiracy. The story of the missing surgeon who died trying to protect the ethics of medicine became a global outcry against corruption in healthcare. Back at St. Mary's, the hospital board issued a statement mourning Renner's death. They claimed ignorance of any illegal activity, though whispers among staff told another story. Many of those who had once dismissed him as paranoid now realized he had been right all along. His name was cleared, and the record of his service was restored. A week later, a small memorial was held in the hospital courtyard. Former colleagues, patients, and family gathered under gray skies. His wife, Claire, stood quietly, clutching the folded flag from his memorial service. As she approached the podium, her voice wavered. "He didn't die because he failed," she said softly. "He died because he cared too much. He saw wrong and refused to look away." Detective Keene stood in the crowd, her eyes fixed on the framed photo of the man whose story she had spent years untangling. She knew the case was officially closed, but something inside her whispered that justice was only partially served. Too many people had gotten away. Too many hands had blood on them. As the mourners dispersed, Keene noticed a small envelope left at the base of the memorial. It had no name, no return address, just a wax seal stamped with a gold caduceus. Inside was a single line typed on old paper: "He wasn't the only one who knew." Keene folded the note slowly, the chill of realization settling over her. The network wasn't completely destroyed. Somewhere, others were still watching, still operating in the shadows. Dr. Renner's death had revealed one piece of the truth, but the deeper darkness he had uncovered was far from over.